Hi, everybody. Welcome. Welcome to our amazing webinar tonight with Elise Resch on Path to Mind, Body, Soul, and Health and intuitive eating in this time of COVID-19. We're going to begin in just a minute. We're allowing everybody to join the webinar. I'm Rabbi Denise Ager, and you're here with Rabbi Max Chaikin, Congregation Kol Ami.
Hello, everyone.
We're so glad you're with us, and we are so glad tonight to continue what we've been doing during this pandemic. As we've offered a series of health informational webinars at Kol Ami, things to help us through this time of uncertainty, and through this time we've had so many questions, medical questions and health questions. And so we are so thrilled to be able to welcome and present our own temple member, Elise Resch, tonight, who is a best-selling author of her book, now in its fourth edition of Intuitive Eating, a revolutionary anti-diet approach. And Elise has sold over 500,000 copies of Intuitive Eating. Now, I want to tell you, as a relatively new author, 500,000 copies of a book is an incredible number of books. And Elise is incredibly gracious to be with us and to share her extraordinary knowledge. Tonight we are going to have time for question and answers towards the end of our webinar. So you have the chat function on your screen. So if you want to write a question in the chat, something that comes up as we get closer to the end of our webinar tonight, we'll take a look at all of them, and Elise will respond to your inquiries. So without further ado, we're so glad again that you're with us here at Congregation Kol Ami in West Hollywood, California, for this important medical update, health update, COVID-19 update. And we're so glad to welcome our temple member, Elise Resch. Welcome, Elise. We're so glad you're here. Let me introduce Elise, and then I'm going to turn it over to her. Elise is a nutritional therapist in private practice in Beverly Hills. She has over 36 years of experience, and she specializes in eating disorders, intuitive eating, and health at every size. She is the co-author of Intuitive Eating and the Intuitive Eating Workbook, and author of the Intuitive Eating Workbook for Teens. And she has published so many journal articles and blog posts. She also does regular speaking engagements, podcasts, and extensive media interviews. You might have caught her on KTLA or KTTV, NBC, AP Press, KFI Radio, and so many others. Elise is nationally known for her work in helping patients break free from the diet mentality through the intuitive eating process. Her philosophy embraces the goal of developing body positivity and reconnecting with one's internal wisdom about eating. She supervises and trains many health professionals as a certified eating disordered registered dietitian. She's a fellow of the International Association of Eating Disorders Professionals and a fellow of the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics. And she's my friend. So welcome. We're so glad, Elise. We're so honored to have you here with us tonight. Please, we are needing so much help, especially in this time of pandemic. Food's available, we're at home, world is a different world than just a few months ago. So help us learn together tonight.
And I might surprise you a little. You won't be hearing what you think you're going to be hearing.
Well, we look forward to it.
Thank you, Denise. And actually, it's now over 38 years. It must have been an old bio I sent you.
Well, maybe a long time.
Right. So Rabbi Denise invited me, as you know, to speak on her series on health and COVID. And I'd like to start by saying that to me, the secret to physical health is, drum roll, no, you thought I was going to say nutrition, because most of you know that I'm a nutritionist. But instead, I think it's mental health. So that, of course, includes the social determinants of health, such as poverty, access to healthcare, education, racism, and oppression. I'm going to talk a little bit about oppression as we go on. So I think that the best way within our power to achieve optimal health, mental health, is to get the most joy and satisfaction out of eating through intuitive eating, which I'll obviously be telling you more about. Have I got you intrigued? I hope so. So
Totally.
the truth is that most people constantly worry about what to eat, when to eat, how much to eat. And unfortunately, all that worry does is to raise stress levels and cortisol levels, which is probably the worst thing for your physical and mental health. So let's take the worry out of it, and I'm going to teach you all about intuitive eating. So I'm doing a little self-promotion on this first page. The middle, this is the 4th edition of Intuitive Eating. It's actually the 25th anniversary edition. It came out, the first edition came out 25 years ago. And I co-authored this with my co-author. And then the Intuitive Eating Workbook came out in 2017, and I co-authored that also. And that's to go along with the book, a lot of exercises to help one learn how to be an intuitive eater. This gives you all the information behind it, the science and all of that. And these are the exercises. Then this is my baby. This is the Intuitive Eating Workbook for Teens that I wrote, and that came out last year. And I wrote that primarily for teens, but for the teen in each of us, because I believe very strongly that each of us, no matter what age, has a teen inside. I may be 75 years old, but I have got a very rebellious teen inside of me. And this one isn't published yet. I just got a picture of it. This is the Intuitive Eating Journal. What does it say? I never remember. It says Principles for Nourishing a Healthy Relationship with Food. And that's coming out next June, along with an intuitive eating deck of cards, which I also didn't have a picture of. And this little thing over here, this is pretty old. That came out, I think, in 2003. It's a discussion format between my co-author and me. And so it's an audiobook. And I just got word, this is coming out in audio and Audible next week on Tuesdays.
Wow.
So
Oh, wow.
if you don't feel like reading,
Mazel tov.
you can get it this way. Now, interestingly, the 3rd edition was an audio, and I started to listen to it and I couldn't listen. The reader was so boring, I couldn't stand it. So we asked to read this book. Well, Brookstone didn't allow us to do that, but they did allow us to record the beginning. So I recorded the foreword, and Evelyn, my co-author, recorded the introduction, and then the rest is a professional reader and might be better after that. So let's get started. What is intuitive eating anyway? I mean, people have been hearing about it. It's in the news. It's gone viral for a while now, and there's a lot of misconceptions about what it is. But basically, the easy definition is that intuitive eating is about just tuning into your internal wisdom about eating, which we're all born with. And it's also a self-care philosophy that has 10 basic principles that I'm going to go through in a bit. Okay, so as I said, there are a lot of myths about intuitive eating. And the first one is that it's all instinctual. And I want to tell you why this is a myth and where that came from. A number of years ago, I was looking through a brochure of a conference I was going to, actually, that International Association of Eating Disorders. And I found that there was going to be a talk on intuitive eating. And I went, oh, that's interesting. So I got in touch with the speaker and I said, hi, I'm Elise Resch. I'm one of the co-authors of Intuitive Eating. I see that you're going to be talking about intuitive eating. And he said, oh yeah, it's going to be a great talk. I'm glad you're going to be there. Come and watch, listen to the talk. So flash forward a few months, I go to the talk or I go to the conference, and the night before I'm looking through the flash drive that they gave us of the slides, and I was horrified because it looked as if he was going to bash intuitive eating. So I go in the next day, and standing room only, people are just so interested in intuitive eating. He welcomes me in, he gets me a chair, he introduces me as one of the esteemed authors of intuitive eating. Has the first slide's a picture of the book and our names and all of that. And then he proceeds to bash intuitive eating. And the way he does this is he says, I said, I looked in the dictionary for the definition of intuition, and it said instinct. And we all know that we can't eat by instinct alone. And then he went on to say it just wasn't going to work. And of course, he was then promoting some book he was going to write, which I've never seen. I think it was called Responsible Eating, which sounds horrible. In any case, I left the room and my colleagues were coming up to me and, "Are you okay, Elise?" And so I wasn't so okay. But I called Evelyn, my co-author, and I said, we were in the midst of writing the third edition. That was in 2011. And I said, we have got to get a better definition of intuitive eating so people really understand it. So I started doing a lot of reading, including Peter Levine's book. Well, I won't go on with that, but, and I'm going to tell you now the true of intuitive eating. So it has to do with the brain, the brilliant triune brain. And we call the brain the triune brain because it has three integral systems. And the first one is called the reptilian brain. And this developed when there were dinosaurs. And these dinosaurs had only this brain functioning, and it was for survival. So if they saw another little dinosaur running around and they were hungry, they'd go grab that dinosaur and eat it and not feel anything, not be feeling, "Oh, I'm scared to eat it. It's got too many," well, it wouldn't be carbs, I don't know. Or they also didn't have the ability to think, "Oh, I just, this is not the way I want to eat." They just went for it. It was instinct. And this is this part of the brain is embedded, the reptilian brain. Some people call it the lizard brain. It's embedded deep within the brain, down at the brain stem, and it's not under conscious control. So it's really just for survival. So then the next layer of brain functioning developed with mammals, and it's called the mammalian brain or the limbic brain. And this is the seat of emotions and social behaviors. And it sits right on top of the reptilian brain, and it receives impulses from that part of the brain, and it enhances them and elaborates on the data that it gets. And it gives more choices because it deals with emotion. And I think you all know, who any of you have had pets, you know that your dogs or cats have feelings. You go away on a vacation, you come back and they pee on the floor or something because they've got feelings, but they don't have the ability to talk about their feelings. So what differentiates us as humans from lower level animals is the neocortex. Or the human brain, and it's the rational brain, it's the intellect, and it's highly evolved from that instinctual matrix, and it has the ability, our thinking part has the ability to monitor our instincts and our emotions in both positive and negative ways. So the true definition of intuitive eating is a dynamic interplay of instinct, emotion, and thought. And that guy who was talking about intuitive eating, who said we can't eat by instinct alone, was absolutely right. But that's not what intuitive eating is, because it does involve our emotions and our ability to think through things. So I like this quote from Brene Brown about the definition of intuition. She said, "It's our ability to hold space for uncertainty and our willingness to trust the many ways we've developed knowledge and insight, including instinct, experience, faith, and reason." So intuition is a very important part of all of us. Now, as I mentioned before, there are 10 principles of intuitive eating, and I have them here in order, and I will go through them in order as to not confuse you if you happen to read them in the book, but I have kind of tossed them around in my work and not necessarily gone through them one after another. And in the books I've written myself, I've changed them around too. So the first principle is called reject the diet mentality, and this is an absolutely critical piece of intuitive eating. We have to come to terms with the fact that diets don't work. And we have to get angry at diet culture that promotes weight loss as its goal. And I just wanted to define diet culture for you right now. If you've heard it, I'm sure, but if you don't know exactly what it is. So diet culture worships thinness and equates it to health and moral virtue. It promotes weight loss as a means of attaining higher status. And it demonizes certain ways of eating while elevating others. And it makes you hyper vigilant about eating. And it oppresses people who don't match up with its supposed picture of health, which disproportionately harms women, femmes, trans folks, people in larger bodies, people of color, and people with disabilities, damaging both their mental and physical state. And this definition comes from a really wonderful book that I would recommend called Anti-Diet, Reclaim Your Time, Money, Wellbeing, and Happiness Through Intuitive Eating by Christy Harrison, who is someone who changed her whole life through intuitive eating, and she wrote this wonderful book. So So that's diet culture. And why do we give up dieting? Why should we? For many reasons, but diets do not work. And there was a researcher at UCLA named Tracy Mann who, she's not at UCLA anymore, but she did a mega study of 31 diets, different diets. And her conclusion was that 95% of the people who lost weight on diets gained the weight back, and up to 2/3 of them regained more weight than they lost. So she concluded that weight cycling is dangerous, and in fact is really a negative thing, and increases the risk of heart disease and diabetes. If I put my glasses on, I could read what I wrote there. Anyway, she concluded that dieting is a consistent predictor of weight gain. And she said that diets do not lead to sustained weight loss or health benefits for the majority of people. And I'm going to say, in addition to that, because this is something I'm, very much looking into and talking about, I believe that the reason the diets fail, besides all of these things, is that the dieting is a social justice issue. Weight stigma, they lead to weight stigma. That's what the last thing that you said. Dieting promotes weight bias and weight stigma. And it is a social justice issue. I mean, we all are so aware of racism and homophobia and all the other isms, but many people don't understand that weight bias and weight stigma is a form of oppression. So I am all about anti-dieting, and I want to go back to this slide. So the first thing you have to do is throw out all those diet books and, the magazines that come, the People magazine articles and the Us magazines that tell you all about the celebrities' latest diets. Just throw them out. Don't have them around you. And in terms of social media, only follow body positive, health at every size social media posts. And please unfollow the diet culture accounts, the ones where, people come in and they Photoshop their pictures and they show themselves, in their best, which isn't even real. And they just really promote feeling bad about oneself. So when I have clients that come in to me and say, I am such a failure at dieting, and they're really in despair. And I say to them, no, you're not a failure at dieting. You're a success at ego development. And I will explain that in a few moments.
I need that, Elise. I'm the
Okay.
first one. I need that. So I hope you'll address that.
I am going to address that. So why don't diets work? Why, I've told you that they don't work. And by the way, that 95%, it's now about 98% of people who lose weight on diets gain it back. So from a physiological and actually neurochemical standpoint, diets starve the body and the brain, and they throw people into primal hunger. Because, there's no diet for weight loss that's going to give you enough calories to survive. And so it puts you into primal hunger, which is a place that's felt by that survival part of the brain. And one of the reasons I went into all the parts of the brain is to refer back to this, that when you're in primal hunger, that reptilian brain, which I said is only for survival, there is no conscious control of it. It will do everything it can do to get you back to the weight you started at or more. And it does this through releasing certain neuropeptides. One of them is called neuropeptide Y, NPY, and there are others. And this leads to uncontrollably seeking calories and carbohydrates. So any of you who have spent a whole day not eating because you're looking forward to some dinner in the evening, and we don't go into restaurants, but if you're sitting outside and you're served the bread basket, you cannot stop. You have to eat the entire bread basket because you are in primal hunger and you have no control of that. I will tell you that. So if you feel bad about yourself, stop, because it's that survival part of the brain that is trying to get you back to where you were. There's a word I like, which is homeobalance, which is keeping the body where it's supposed to be. And that's what the brain is doing. It doesn't know, that part of the brain, that there's a McDonald's on every corner or whatever. It just knows that red alert, lights going on, organism in danger. And in order to keep the person alive, it slows everything in the body, including the metabolism. And metabolism is your engine. It's what burns up all the food that you eat. So That's not a good thing. You want to be able to eat more, not less. And it also reduces leptin levels, and leptin is your fullness hormone. So if someone has lost a significant amount of weight, and then the survival part of the brain is trying to get you to eat more, but your fullness hormone is lowered, you don't get satisfied at the same level of food as you did when you started. So it's just a trap. It's just not a good thing. So they don't work physiologically, diets, or neurochemically. But now what I want to talk to you about is why they don't work psychologically, because this is, I'm just fascinated by psychology. I should have become a psychologist, but maybe not, because then I wouldn't get to do this great work that I do. In any case, there are a couple of psychological issues that are important to talk about. And the first one is deprivation. Remember when I was saying earlier that people worry about what to eat, how much to eat. Well, diets always tell you what to eat and how much to eat, and you rarely get to eat exactly what you want, or if you do, you don't get to eat enough of it to satisfy you. So basically, we start to feel deprived when we're on a diet for a long time. And Abraham Maslow, who was a 20th century American psychologist, created this model called a hierarchy of needs. And his theory was that all humans have basic needs that we have to fulfill before we can go on to higher level needs. So the most basic need is hunger and thirst. And then right above that is security and protection. So if you can imagine that a homeless person is absolutely not going to be thinking about self-actualization. That person's going to be trying to get food and some, shelter. So basically, we are driven by our unmet needs. What we don't have is what we want. And I think everyone has had experiences where there's something that you're really dying to have and you don't have it, and that's all you think about. Or you don't have it because you think you shouldn't have it, whether it's food or something else, and it's forbidden and you want it even more. So one of the main forces, psychological forces of why diets don't work is deprivation. The other one is really, I talked about that book as being my baby, but this is really my baby, the whole concept of autonomy. And I want to tell you a little bit about Erik Erikson, who was a 20th century German-American developmental psychologist and psychoanalyst. And the main concern of his life and his work was the development of identity. And he created a model that was called the 8 stages of man, which of course, if he were around, I'd call him and say, Dr. Erikson, change the name, it's got to be the 8 stages of human. But in any case, he's been gone for a long time. So his belief was that each human being goes through 8 psychosocial stages throughout their lives. And at each stage, there's a crisis that has to be addressed and conquered in order to be able to go on to the next stage of development. And someone who is able to go through each stage and conquer it has a healthy personality or a healthy ego. Remember, I mentioned ego earlier. So I just want to talk about the first 2 stages. The first stage is the psychological crisis is trust versus mistrust. And intuitive eating is really based on this stage, because when that infant is born, the infant, of course, has instincts to be hungry, to be full, to pee, whatever. But when that infant cries and is giving the signal that they're hungry, if that infant is fed on a regular, consistent basis, that infant starts to trust that their needs are being met. And you see, it says basic virtue is hope. This is one of the characteristics of this stage. Develops a sense of hope that they'll be able to be cared for throughout their lives. And not only that, but they can start to trust their hunger signal and their fullness signal if there is attunement between the caregiver or parent who is feeding the child, who feeds that child when they're hungry, not on some, I don't know, arbitrary schedule, which was popular at some point. I don't know. I think some doctors are still doing that. You wake up a baby to feed them. I just don't get it. Or you stop them from eating when they're still hungry. No, they need to be listened to and fed when they're hungry. And when they turn their little heads away from the bottle or the breast, and if that's, honored, then they start to believe that they can trust their signals. So that's the basis and beginning of intuitive eating. And I gave you that before I'm going into the autonomy piece. So the second stage is called autonomy versus shame. So in Erikson's quest for learning about identity, he believed that at this age, the first one was between birth and a year and a half. But at a year and a half, that little person starts to realize that they're a person. They're starting to understand that they're independent. They're not attached by the umbilical cord to their mother anymore. And they start to toddle around and want to do things on their own. And if you've ever been around little kids, little toddlers, their favorite word is no. And some parents are like, oh, they're saying no to everything. You know, I've got this little problem child. No, that child is actually asserting their autonomy. And if they're allowed to pick their own clothes, pick their own toys, say which foods they like, which foods they don't like, they start to get a very healthy ego. And they also need to be allowed to make mistakes and fall down and know that they're okay when they get up. And interestingly, the basic virtue of this stage is will. Well, rebellion, will, autonomy. So if you're put on a diet and it's external, maybe you're not even put on it. Maybe you're following a diet that you read about. And so you've got the ideas of the diet inside of you, but that's not attached to your internal voice. That is coming from somewhere outside. And eventually, any human who has a healthy ego is ultimately going to say, no, I'm done. I'm not going to do this diet anymore. The problem is people start to feel bad about themselves and feel like they're inadequate because they can't stay on that diet. But that's not the case. And that's why I made that comment earlier that my clients who come in and say that they're failures at dieting, they are not. They are absolutely successes at ego development. So this is key. Autonomy is the key to why the assertion of autonomy, why people rebel and not stay on diets. Otherwise, I mean, the data would be completely different. Why would 95 to 98% of people fall off of their diets? Okay, moving on. So I always am suggesting to people, come from the inside out rather than the outside in. Start to learn what your body needs, what is satisfying to your body, when you're hungry, when you're full, because you're not going to rebel against yourself unless you're giving yourself diet rules and you're still tied up in diet culture. So now moving on. So the second principle of intuitive eating, that was the first one. And you have to get to that point where you've had it with dieting, you're never dieting again, so that you can move on to the other principles. The second one is honor your hunger, just the way babies do. So you want to make sure that you keep your body and your brain biologically fed with enough nutrition, otherwise enough energy, carbohydrates. The thing that really gets me is this carb phobia thing that's around, the keto diets. It just makes me crazy because I have to tell you that your brain can only operate on carbohydrate, on glucose, which is your smallest form of sugar. 25% of your intake of calories goes to the brain, and it's all got to be glucose. And glucose is a one molecule substance. I actually have a picture of it somewhere, but I didn't put it in here. It's the only energy substrate that crosses the blood-brain barrier, which means it's the only form of energy that will go from your bloodstream into your brain. Now, you probably have questions about what happens when people don't have carbs, and I'll answer that if you do. But we must have enough calories and carbohydrates throughout the day. And otherwise, as I said earlier, you go into primal hunger. And so your body has very reliable hunger signals. It's just that most people have gotten disconnected from them because of all the diets that they've been on. Okay, so I want to go to the second myth about intuitive eating, which is that some people call it the hunger fullness diet. And they like to turn intuitive eating into a diet because it makes them feel better to have rules. Unfortunately, once it becomes a diet, they're going to rebel against it. So no, you don't have to eat at a perfect 3.5. There's a hunger and fullness scale in the book. You don't have to worry about eating at a perfect level of hunger and stopping at a perfect level of fullness. It's not that. It's a very new, intuitive eating is very nuanced and very deep, and it encompasses many factors. So it is not the hunger fullness diet. Okay, so principle 3 is make peace with food. And this is key, absolutely key. You must give yourself unconditional permission to eat. No saying, I can't have this, I can't have that. Telling yourself that you can't or shouldn't have a particular food will lead to that deprivation that I mentioned earlier, and uncontrollable cravings and often binging. And what I like to say is make all foods emotionally equivalent. Now, I am a nutritionist. I do have a Master of Science degree in nutrition. I do know that certain foods have more nutrients than other foods. I mean, probably broccoli has more nutrients than green jelly beans. However, you want to have the same emotional reaction, regardless of whether you're eating the broccoli or the jelly beans, meaning you're not good for eating broccoli and bad for eating jelly beans. So all foods need to be emotionally equivalent. And so people say to me, well, if you tell me that I can eat ice cream sundaes, that's all I'm going to eat, I'll never stop eating ice cream sundaes. Or I have a very dear friend who belongs to this temple, whose name I won't mention, who says, if you tell me I can only eat steak, I'll eat steak every single night of the week. Now, okay, this is what will help you be secure and not be scared that you'll never stop eating certain foods. And it comes from food habituation studies. So the definition of habituation is the greater the stimulus, the less the response. So habituation is a decrease in your response to a stimulus after repeated presentations. So for example, I had a client once came in the first time and I said, what's your favorite food? And she said, grilled cheese sandwiches. I said, great. So how about you have a grilled cheese sandwich every day of the week? And she went, wow, this restaurant nearby was having grilled cheese week and I'm going to go there every day. And she fortunately had the privilege of being able to go there every day. Lots of privilege. And when she came in the next week, I said, how did that go? And she said, oh, by the third day, I was so sick of grilled cheese sandwiches. So she was experiencing habituation. The more you have the freedom to have what you want to have, and it's no longer forbidden, and it's no longer going to be taken away in the future, it's just not as exciting as it is when it is forbidden or you haven't had it in a long time. And, you know, sometimes you'll be somewhere, like I remember being in Paris once many years ago and sitting at a restaurant that had such incredible food, and I wanted every bite of it. I didn't care how full I got, because I hadn't ever had it before and I was likely never going to be in that restaurant again. That wasn't habituation. That was a delightful experience. And, you know, giving permission to have, you know, is whatever I wanted to eat. So the more a person's exposed to a particular food, the less appealing it becomes. And I think if you really think about it, you recognize that that happens in almost everything in life. You're so excited about something new. And then after a while, you still like it, but it just doesn't have that pull on you as the forbidden or something new thing has. Now, that what I read at the bottom, unless that food is forbidden, if you're saying, oh, I'll give this intuitive eating thing a try, and if it doesn't work, I'll go on whatever, one of these diets, they keep circulating and recycling, because then you're holding the possibility of future deprivation. So even the perception that you could be deprived in the future will not allow habituation to take place because the food is still forbidden in some part of your brain. Okay, now, the third myth about intuitive eating is it means eat whatever you want, whenever you want. Now you're going to say, well, what are you tricking us, Elise? I thought you just told me we can eat what we want. That is true. However, the tongue is not the only part of your body that you want to tune into. So we can eat whatever we want. We also want to think about how our body feels. And at this point in life, my body doesn't like garlic or onions like it used to when I was young. And so, sure, I might want to rub a piece of garlic on a piece of bread and I'm going to suffer for that. So I might not decide not to have that. So it's listen to your tongue, think about what you're craving, and then also think about how your body's going to feel. And that's where the part of the brain, the neocortex, the thinking part of the brain comes in. The instinct might be to eat something that you want, but the thinking part might say, oh, you might not feel so well, so maybe we'll have less of it. Okay. So the fourth principle is called challenge the food police. Now, I love to tell people that babies are born with instincts. We know that instincts to eat and to feel hunger and fullness and the instinct to pee and all those things. And they're born with emotions. I mean, they cry and they laugh and they giggle and they're adorable. And That's part of what they're born with. They're not born with thoughts. Those thoughts have to be put into them in their homes. And so they hear language and cadence, and eventually they hear beliefs. They hear what the family believes in. And, like, well, we won't talk about the election, but it's so interesting when I've heard some teenagers talk on the radio, they're voting just like their parents voted. That's what they were taught early on. So it's very important to understand that the food police have rules. They say there are good foods and bad foods, and then they talk about it in the home. And so the child grows up with a belief that certain foods are good, certain foods are bad. And then they take that belief in, and the food police is inside of them now. So it's the internal food police. They're speaking the language that they're hearing in the home until finally it becomes internalized and they really believe it. So challenge the food police means speak up to the voice within you, speak up to eventually, when you feel brave enough, to people who are trying to tell you, you shouldn't have this, you should have that. It's very important to recognize the truth and not take in what people are saying, but be able to refute it. Okay, so principle 5. Now, I said earlier that I don't follow the principles in order. When I'm working with a client, I immediately go to satisfaction after the first principle of reject the diet mentality. Why? Because I think if you look through a lens of satisfaction, it's going to inform all the other principles. So if you tell somebody, start paying attention to your hunger and fullness, that doesn't feel like fun. But if I say to someone, do you think you would like to have more satisfaction and joy in your eating? Pretty invariably, people will say, well, sure, why, who wouldn't? And so think about this. If you were about to go to your very favorite restaurant to pick up food or eat outside, would you eat a peanut butter and jelly sandwich in the car on the way there? And I ask clients this, and invariably they say, well, no, of course not. And I say, why? And they say, well, I wouldn't have an appetite. I wouldn't be hungry. The food wouldn't be so good. Bingo. You know intuitively that you're going to enjoy your food more if you have some hunger. So you can see how looking at satisfaction, looking through that lens, really helps you realize that you probably want to eat with some level of comfortable hunger. If you're in primal hunger, as I talked about, then obviously that's not going to be very satisfying because you can barely taste the food as you're shoveling it in, because it's that primal part of the brain, the survival part, that's sending you out to eat. So that's how it informs hunger and fullness. And with fullness, I mean, after you're comfortably full, the food isn't quite as good as it was in the first few bites. So, you're just paying attention to satisfaction. It's not as satisfying. And for me, if I get a big bowl of pasta, and I love pasta, it's my favorite food, and I'm eating and it's delicious, and then I find I'm comfortably full, then I have the thought, oh, I can have some left over for tomorrow, and it's going to be satisfying again tomorrow. So by paying attention to satisfaction, you end up actually getting the right amount of food because you're wanting to really enjoy your eating. It's a big piece of intuitive eating. In fact, it's such a big piece of intuitive eating that I think it's the driving force of intuitive eating. I call it the hub of the wheel, and you can't read those, but those are all the principles, and it really does inform all of them. We don't have time tonight to talk about every one of them in terms of satisfaction. Okay, the next principle is feel your fullness. And the way to feel fullness is to start when you're comfortably hungry, because if you're ravenous, you just can't feel it because you're eating and eating and eating. And but if you're starting with comfortable fullness, then you have a contrast. Comfortable hunger. You have a contrast for when you're feeling comfortably full. And if you're thinking about satisfaction, as I just said, you're going to recognize that you're going to have a much more enjoyable eating life if you do stop when you're comfortably full. You won't be physically uncomfortable. And the way to do that is to pause in the meal. Just take a time out for a moment. Ask yourself, how does the food taste? Is it as good as it was when I started? What fullness level am I at? And here are some fullness nuances. I mean, you can think of the stomach as this vessel. And interestingly, when you're really hungry, not in primal hunger, but just hungry, ready to eat, after a few bites, that hunger goes away, but that doesn't mean you're full, comfortably full, because you're not satisfied at that point. So you need to eat some more to get comfortable and nourished. And then, of course, if you eat all the way to the top of the stomach, then you're too full and really uncomfortable. So tuning into fullness is just going to make you a happier person. And this is something that it's a concept of mine. I wrote a paper on this a while ago, and if you want it, write to me at eliserush@gmail.com and I'll send it to you. It's pretty old. You can tell I look like I'm about 12 in the picture. But anyway, this came about from working with a 15-year-old boy who came to me and said, you know, I think I eat too much food. And we started talking and I asked him about emotions and he said, oh no, I don't eat emotionally. Absolutely not. I said, well, what happens when you're bored? Oh, I go find something to do. And I said, well, what happens when you're upset? Oh, I go and talk to my mom. Or you're angry. Oh, I shoot some balls. Or I don't eat emotionally. And I said, I only eat 3 meals a day. And I said, so tell me, what happens at the end of your meal? He says, I'm stuffed. He said, I'm absolutely stuffed. And I said, okay. So do you think your body needs that much food if it's telling you that you're that full? And he said, well, no. And I said, so if this is the amount of food your body needs, but you're eating to here, what do you think this part is for? And he said, I don't want to feel sad if I have to stop. And this was profound, actually. And I have talked to many people about this, and I think it's a pretty universal experience about everything. You know, if I'm reading a great book and I'm dying to get through it because I want to know what happens, and then I get to the end, I am sad. I'm starting to look at what other books that author has written. Or if you're at the end of a vacation and you've had a wonderful time and you may like your work, but the vacation's over, you're sad. Well, it happens with eating. When you get to that point of comfortable fullness, where the food is not quite as good as it was in the beginning, where you're starting to realize that you'll be physically uncomfortable, there's this feeling of sadness that comes up. And it comes up for me regularly. But I call it emotion light, not emotion heavy, because it's the kind of emotion that if you get up and do something else, it's gone, you're fine. And we get to eat like 6 times a day. So it's, you know, it's not your only experience of eating. So the sadness of saying enough. Okay, the next principle is called Cope with Your Emotions with Kindness. And I will tell you that in all the editions of Intuitive Eating up until the 4th edition, this principle was called Cope with Your Emotions Without Using Food. And when my co-author and I were rewriting the book, we realized that was very harsh and we didn't like it. So now we have called it Cope with Your Emotions with Kindness. And understanding that there are many emotions attached to eating. One of them can be comfort. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with having comfort from food. You know, that is just fine. It's only when that is your only coping mechanism for all your emotions, when food is the only thing that will soothe you. So we need to find ways to comfort ourselves and nurture ourselves and, you know, and deal with emotions. I like to talk about strengthening your emotional muscle. And you see, I have the word distract there. When we were doing that little audiobook that had the strawberry on it, the chocolate covered strawberry on it, I was working with the producer on the emotional part, and she was looking at what I had written and she said, well, why are you saying distract? I thought you want people to feel their feelings. And I said, well, yeah, that's true. But you know what? We can't feel feelings 24/7. And there's going to be times when we just need to, you know, put a lid on that. And so find ways to distract yourself that are kind and loving to yourself. Maybe go watch a movie or take a walk or read a book or something that isn't food, because food doesn't ultimately fix the feelings or solve your problems. So, and this is an important piece that I put in here. There are so many people that come to me telling me that they're out of control eaters and they have binge eating disorder and they, you know, diagnose themselves. And I find that so much of their eating extra is because they feel bad about their eating. And once they let go of feeling bad, when they no longer have this diet mentality, the huge part of their emotional eating is gone. I mean, sure, they still may eat for emotions. We all do sometimes, but this constant overeating is coming from the restriction they've had, both physiologically and psychologically, because if the body hasn't had enough food, as I told you, your brain's going to send you out to get more and more. And it feels like it's uncontrollable. And it is, because the brain is sending you out. And from an emotional standpoint, you've been deprived. So now you want everything you didn't have. Okay, moving on. I have 4 questions that I want to suggest that you ask yourself when you think about food. The first question is, am I biologically hungry? And if you are, then eat, please. I don't care what time it is. Don't go with that, oh, you can't eat after 6 o'clock, or, if you're hungry, your body's telling you you need to eat. But if you're not hungry, you want to ask yourself, what am I feeling? And maybe there is a feeling that you're trying to comfort, and maybe you do need something else. So the next question is, what do I really need? And sometimes you have to ask for it. So the 4th question is, what can I ask for to help me through these feelings? Maybe you need to call a friend and talk about something. Maybe you need a hug. Maybe you need something from somebody else. So that helps with the emotional eating part when it goes beyond simple comfort and pleasure. And the principle is respect your body, accept your genetic blueprint. And I wrote on there radical acceptance. Radical acceptance is a big piece of my work, and it's basically coming to terms with what is not changeable and accepting that in every cell of your body. And it really relieves suffering. And I'm going to come back to this in a moment, but I like to say you can't fool Mother Nature. Every one of us is DNA programmed. We have a blueprint for height, for foot size, for weight, for shape, for every aspect of our being. And our bodies want to be what we are programmed to be. And so trying to fight with that is only going to lead to suffering. And radical acceptance is going to relieve that suffering. Most people do not stress about their height. They say, oh yeah, I'd like to be a little taller, or I'd like to be a little shorter, but they don't think they can do something about it. They don't think they can do something about any of the aspects of their body that they just accept. But the parts they don't accept, the size, the shape, they keep trying to change it, and it doesn't work. So respecting your body means accepting your genetic blueprint, being kind to your body physically and mentally. And here's the most important part. We have so many characteristics about us that are who we are, our authentic selves. We are more than our bodies. And so it's about spending time being loving to ourselves and acknowledging all the wonderful parts about us. And this goes back to what I was talking about, oppression, that weight stigma, weight bias is something that is so harmful and traumatic. And in fact, people who will say, well, don't we all know that weight is connected with physical health? No, actually it is not. What is connected with physical health is your emotional state, your mental state, and weight bias is actually, weight stigma has a worse effect on one's health than anything to do with one's size. Also the social determinants of health. And something that I learned, which really shocked me, is that when you're looking at all of those social determinants, actually only 10% of your health is connected with your eating and your exercise. That does not mean don't take care of yourself, don't move your body, don't eat foods that are nourishing to yourself. But these other pieces are really, really significant in your health. And I really do think that the mental health is a huge component of physical health. I mean, the mind-body connection is so strong. And the respecting your body also means talk nicely to yourself. Don't say mean things to yourself. Don't look in the mirror and belittle yourself. Don't compare yourself to other people. We are who we are, and we need to be grateful for who we are and what our bodies can do. And then there's movement, feel the difference. This used to be called exercise, feel the difference, but we changed that because people get into this whole militant exercising thing. They've got to do it. If they don't sweat, then they're not going to do it at all. If they don't do it 5 or 6 days a week, then they haven't done it well enough. Have joyful movement. Find the thing that is really fun for you, whether it's dancing in your room or going out hiking with your kids, or yoga, simple yoga. It doesn't matter what it is, or swimming. Make sure that it's just something that you really enjoy, and then feel how your body feels as a result of this, not about weight loss. Okay, and the last principle, finally, nutrition. She's a nutritionist. Is she going to talk about nutrition? Well, it's very purposeful that Gentle Nutrition, which is what we call it, Honor Your Health with Gentle Nutrition, is at the end of every one of the books. And there are many books, but it's at the end. And that is because until you've made full peace with food, until you have committed that you will never go on another diet, you really can't start thinking about your nutrition. And so, something interesting happens with my clients after they've been with me for a long time and all they've been eating is ice cream sundaes and grilled cheese sandwiches and all of that. They'll come in and they'll say, oh, I don't feel so good. Can you teach me a little bit about how I could feel better? I haven't pooped for a while. What do I need? And then I'll teach them about fiber or fruits and vegetables. But it has to come from a time when you really feel truly that all foods are emotionally equivalent. And that's when nutrition starts to come into the picture, right at the end. Now, the fourth myth of intuitive eating is that the ultimate goal of intuitive eating is weight loss. And I'm sure you know by now that that is not true. And it's anti-diet, it's anti-weight loss. That doesn't mean that people's bodies don't normalize to where they're meant to be. Sometimes they do. But the goal of intuitive eating is not weight loss, and any focus on weight loss only can disconnect you from your internal signals and sabotage the whole process. Now, this is really great and interesting. Intuitive eating is actually an evidence-based process. There are over 125 studies at this point in time that validate intuitive eating for its mental and physical benefits. So intuitive eaters have lower sense of internalized culturally thin ideal. They have less disordered eating, less emotional eating, less self-silencing. When I was talking about speaking up to the food police, they speak up. From a physical standpoint, they have lower triglycerides, higher HDLs, higher self-esteem, well-being and optimism, a greater variety of foods that they eat. They have more appreciation of their bodies, better interoceptive awareness, and that's just a very complicated term for tuning in. They're able to tune into everything that their bodies are telling them. They have more pleasure in eating, better coping mechanisms, more psychological hardiness, and unconditional self-regard. There are no failures at intuitive eating, only learning experiences. And I want to explain this through a model that I wrote up one day called the spiral of healing. And I say that the momentum is always upward and onward. And those little loops along the way are opportunities for healing and learning, because so many people on a diet, which is a straight line, they fall off of it and then they feel terrible. This is, you have a moment of eating too much and you felt uncomfortably full or not eating enough or anything along the way. You just say, okay, let me be curious. Come from a place of curiosity, not judgment. And then you learn what happened. Maybe you were so tied up with work all day you forgot to eat. And by the time the evening came, you just couldn't stop eating. And so, you know, there's no judgment. There is no failure. There is no judgment. There's only self-compassion and gratitude and kindness. So John Bradshaw said, it's okay to make mistakes. You know, I can't read it because it's behind your picture, Denise, but would you
Sorry.
me? It's okay.
It's okay to make mistakes. Mistakes are our teachers and they help us to learn.
Yeah, and that's John Bradshaw, who was a US educator and author and self-help movement leader, and he popularized the term inner child. So I want to end with words to live by. The first one is wisdom. You have inborn wisdom. You were born with it. You got disconnected from it, likely. You got disconnected. And it's about learning how to get reconnected to that inborn wisdom about eating, hunger, fullness, what you like to eat, how your body feels, self-compassion. You've only done the best you could do with the resources you've had. And this is so important. That's true. Until we learn something new, we can't do any better. So have self-compassion for what you've been through. Most of us have been through a lot of trauma and difficult times. And food sometimes was the only thing that got us through. So self-compassion is key. Set your intention to eat intuitively rather than go on another diet. Mindfulness without obsession, which means staying present. And that's the only way you can tune into the hunger and fullness signals and how your body's feeling. So just being mindful, and actually mindfulness practices are great and it's part of intuitive eating too. Balance, avoid all or nothing thinking. Tiferet from Kabbalah, that's, we want to be in balance Anyway, I won't go there. That's for you, Denise. And
Oh, you're doing good. That's exactly right.
right? And gratitude, just stay in gratitude. Actually, studies show that when you're in gratitude, you raise your serotonin levels. You literally feel better when you are in gratitude. And I truly think it's great to have a gratitude list every day, whether you do it in your head or you write it down. It makes you feel so much better. Patience for the process. This doesn't happen overnight. You have been bombarded by diet culture. And by the way, I just realized about a month ago that in the middle of diet culture is cult. It is a cult.
Mhm.
It is actually something that takes over your mind and brainwashes you. So patience for getting out of something that you've been thinking most of your life and getting into this process. And then freedom. You are finally free from the shackles of diet culture and from, you're free to trust your body. And that's the key. Questions. There we go.
Wow, Elise, my mind is like being
Wow.
blown
Yeah.
because with all of this amazing really way to retrain how well, certainly I was raised that way. I've been up and down and up and down and up and down in every diet all around the town,
Right.
and everybody knows it. And this is just so amazing, the freedom, that the pure freedom to be able to tune into your body and to make a healthy choice based on what your body's telling you.
Correct. And, and what does healthy mean? It's used, this whole wellness idea, it's really tied up with weight loss, and it's wrong. I mean, health, it's all health. That's why I named
Yes.
this, mind, body, spirit, health. There's so many incredible, wonderful things to think about and learn about and be active in this world, to be constantly thinking. So many of my clients, they spend all day thinking about their bodies, their weight, how bad they've been, how good they've been. It's
Right. There's so much punishment. Have I been good today? Have I been bad today? Can you talk 1 minute? We have some questions in the chat that I do want to address, but can you talk about the scale in all of this?
Yeah,
The
I didn't
people
mention
that
that.
live by the number on the
Well,
scale.
the scale is a false idol. It's almost like, some religions that worship.
Idolatry, sure. Yeah.
It's a false idol, and it means nothing. I mean, we have such fluctuations in weight. To get on the scale one day and say, oh, I've lost a pound, I feel so good, or I've gained 2 pounds and I feel so bad. There are fluctuations. I have my clients, get rid of their scales. I've got a few under my couch in my office that they brought to me because they weren't ready to get rid of it. Some people go and smash the scale. I have not been on a scale in over 20 years or 30 years. Wow. I mean, I have no idea what I weigh. I don't care, because the scale is meaningless. And, our bodies change over a lifetime, and our body composition, our muscles, tone. People start doing weight training and then they get on a scale and they've gained 10 pounds and they're freaked out. Well, they've just put on a couple of pounds of muscle, and each pound of muscle holds 4 pounds of water. So there you go. There's the 8 or 10 pounds you've gained. And yet they think they failed. So they quit exercising or moving their bodies and start eating too much.
Some great question. Does the stomach really stretch? Asked Wendy Hartman. Can you address?
It's a muscle. So it expands, doesn't stretch permanently. It expands and contracts. I mean, I know when I eat, my stomach expands, and then after I start digesting my food, it starts to contract again. So no, it doesn't stretch, it just expands and contracts.
There's a kind of really great question. It's specific, but I'm going to ask, what's the best way to find out if you have food allergies, and how can you talk a little bit more about, you say you shouldn't deny yourself anything, and on the other hand, sometimes our bodies have reactions to different foods. I know people that have nightshade allergy, so maybe you can frame this for us. What's the best way to find out about that, to deal with that?
The first thing I want to say is, when I talked about the dynamic interplay of instinct, emotion, and thought, you have to use your thinking part of your brain if you do know that you have an absolute allergy to something. I am allergic to calamari and shrimp. My body goes into a round.
Because you're Jewish. You're not supposed to eat that stuff anyway.
So, I mean, I'm not going to eat that food, even if I feel like it, even if I'm at a wedding and I see beautiful shrimp with cocktail sauce and it's not Orthodox.
I know.
I'm not going to eat it. Now, allergies, there's a lot of phony baloney allergy testing going out there. any kind of IgG testing is not accurate. So I have people come into my office with lists of red foods, yellow foods, blue foods. They don't experience any difficulty with certain foods, but now they're told that they're allergic to it, and it is not scientifically accurate. There are accurate, allergy tests that are done in an actual medical doctor allergist office. They're usually skin prick tests, and those are accurate. There are conditions like celiac disease. I've treated a few people with celiac where they literally cannot eat gluten. The majority of people, 95% of people can eat gluten, but they're told that it's bad for you. And then there's that whole nocebo effect, like placebo. You think something good's going to happen, nocebo. You think gluten's bad, and you don't feel well eating it. So you have to really look at where are you getting your source of information about what your allergies are. Make sure it's accurate, make sure it's coming from a medical doctor, and then listen to your body, your own body. And if your body tells you it doesn't feel good, then use that part of the brain to, as I say, monitor your instincts and choose to take better care of yourself.
Wow. A couple questions. Your friend Margie asks, what about vitamins? And Barbara asks, do you have recommendations that you give for good snacking for clients?
Okay, so we probably don't need vitamins. That isn't to say that I don't take some just for, insurance. I don't have any I particularly recommend. We're probably not supposed to take calcium when we're older, and we're not supposed to take iron when we're older. We can get an iron overload. If women past menopause are not releasing the iron because they no longer have periods. So you have to be careful with that. Make sure if you are taking a multivitamin, if you're a woman, that you don't, well, probably a man too, but that you don't take excessive amounts. You have to be careful about not taking too much zinc, because if you take too much zinc, and a lot of people are taking a lot of zinc around COVID, thinking that it's going to, prevent it. Well, too much zinc can cause a decrease in absorption of copper, which can cause an anemia from that. So, I take cinnamon because it's supposed to, regulate blood sugar. I figure it's not going to hurt me. Take turmeric. It's good for arthritis. But
so a lot of natural things. You don't need the natural spices and natural herbs to help combat some of the things that we
and vitamin D sometimes. When a lot of us are low in vitamin D, we don't go in the sun anymore. We wear sunscreen so we don't get skin cancer. So I do take vitamin D, and not every day. And it's not absolutely necessary. It's individual. So see a dietitian, not me. I like to put that into everything. And in terms of snacks, that's what.
Yes, snacks.
Okay. First of all, what do you like to eat? What tastes good to you? I do think that having a snack that has some balance of protein, carbohydrate, and fat holds you better to the next meal. So nuts are great. Hummus and vegetables, or hummus and some pita, they're great because they have protein and fat and carbohydrate in there. Just eating a piece of fruit won't do it unless you're about to go to dinner in an hour. That'll hold you. But if it's the middle of the afternoon, 4 o'clock, and you're not having dinner till 7, that piece of fruit is going to raise your blood sugar and crash it, and you're going to be too hungry. So balance a piece of cheese with that fruit and a cracker, some avocado on a piece of bread and avocado. I once, had a client who had.
We call that avocado toast, Elise.
Yeah, I thought I invented avocado toast. I've been making it forever, but apparently it's something that you pay $12 for.
You're just, you can pay $12 a pound. Right.
But anyway, I have a client who came to me who was eating out of control at night. And I said, well, tell me about your day. And she said, well, I have lunch at noon. And by the time I get home at 7 o'clock, I'm ravenous. So I said, how about a half a peanut butter and jelly sandwich at 4:30? She started to do that. Her eating normalized in the evening. Now, she didn't have emotional issues going on. It was really, she was in primal hunger and she couldn't stop.
Right. What is, like American society, we're really hung up on 3 square meals a day, big breakfast, big lunch, big dinner, kind of left over from another era. Can you talk about that notion of eating when obviously when your body's hungry, you should eat something. Right?
Yes, but I want to say that we're so disconnected from it that sometimes I have a lot of people who don't think that they're hungry in the morning, so they don't eat breakfast. They get up and have a big cup of coffee, and that disguises their hunger. And so, I mean, I'm not hungry the minute I get up. Within a couple of hours, I'm hungry. And if you have a nice balanced breakfast in the morning, it actually sets your hunger and fullness signals throughout the entire day. So
does caffeine mess with your ability to figure out whether you're hungry? Is it the caffeine, Elise, or just the fullness of the liquid?
It's the fluids that are filling the stomach. It messes with it. So eating a balanced meal, again, protein, carbohydrates, and fat, like peanut butter toast in the morning, or avocado toast and a hard-boiled egg, or a yogurt, or it's going to satisfy all that. I'm going to use a term that it's gonna kill you. But when you don't eat for many hours, all this intermittent fasting craziness, what you're doing is you're self-cannibalizing. So remember how I said that the brain only works on carbohydrate. So you haven't eaten anything from 7 o'clock the night before, and you don't eat till 1 o'clock the next day. Well, your brain has to function. I'm sorry, it has to function. So if you're not going to feed yourself something that has carbohydrate in it, you're going to first use up your glycogen stores, which is your stored form of carbohydrate in your liver and your muscle. And that lasts for a few hours. But after that, and this is the killer, you start breaking down your muscle tissue, because muscle is made out of protein, which is made out of amino acids. Amino acids are converted to glucose through a process called gluconeogenesis. Think of those words: genesis, make, neo, new, glucose. So basically what you're doing is you're eating up your body from the inside if you don't feed yourself. And people often say, well, I don't want to eat in the morning because then I get hunger signals later. Well, yeah, if we get hunger signals and we eat from something externally, we're not going to break down our own bodies to feed ourselves. So I do believe in breakfast. It doesn't mean at 6 a.m. It's just sometime within a couple hours after you get up. And for me, eating a lot at night is not comfortable because I get reflux. So again, it's listening to your body. I'm old, this is what happens. So, but I mean,
Elise,
yes.
So there's one more question, because I think though it's specific, I think there's some really important general ideas. So with this notion of intuitive eating, and for those of us, and I'll just include myself in here, who still need to lose some weight, and been told we're still carrying extra weight, maybe 100 pounds overweight. What ought we be doing, and how do we use intuitive eating to do
as
that?
I said, this is not about weight loss. That health at every size that you mentioned when you introduced me,
yes,
I want to mention it. It is a movement. It is a very important concept that we want to take care of ourselves the best we can, regardless of our weight. And the medical model is all about the obesity epidemic, which is not even, just not real. And I mean, they use BMI, which is bogus. It was invented by some mathematician a couple of 100 years ago, or was an astronomer, I don't remember, but and it was just for looking at population studies. They keep changing the range on the BMI. And really what we have to do is stay tuned into our bodies, eat what's delicious and satisfying, eat enough, but not too much, because too much makes you feel uncomfortable. Move your body. I do believe that movement is key, even though I said it's 10%, that's in terms of, looking at all these other things. If you don't have access to healthcare, if you're being stigmatized, and, those are health problems. But the up and down, a diet's never going to work. So you can lose 100 pounds, but you're going to gain back 110. And you just have.
I don't know anything about that.
No. So I'm just so upset that so many people spend their lives going up and down and really feeling physically and emotionally bad about themselves. So
I really appreciate what you're saying. And I was so taken in your presentation tonight, Elise, the 4 questions, we asked 4 questions at Passover, but your 4 questions are tonight about how to tune into your body and what to ask you. What are you really needing? What emotion are you really feeling? What do you really need at this moment? Are you thirsty? Do you need a hug? Do you need to take a walk? Do you need to go to sleep? These are things in our society that, we're sleep deprived. We don't sleep enough. Generally, we don't rest enough, which is different than sleeping, resting and sleeping, right? Most people, the Jewish wisdom, don't work 24/7. Take a day off, right? Take a day off.
Right.
This is so important, and that's rest. That's not work. So
Well,
your 4 questions are just, I think, really a wonderful framework for us to all of ask ourselves so much about.
and let me just mention something about needs since you brought it up, Denise. If this is something that I believe deeply, when you're very young, if your physical or emotional needs are not met, there's some psychic kind of, it's not a decision, it's just a psychic happening that you come to terms with the fact that it's easier, and I don't know how to say it in words because it's not cognitive, but that it's easier to not have needs than to have needs that aren't being met. So we smash down our needs, we take care of everybody else, and we have to learn how to have good self-care. I said in the beginning, this is a self-care process, intuitive eating. So we have a right to have needs. We have a right to have our needs met. And that fits into that piece that you're talking about.
Wow. Elise, thank you. This was just like an amazing thing. We wish you so much luck with this 4th edition
Thank you.
of Intuitive Eating, St. Martin's publication, available at Barnes & Noble, Amazon, easy. This recording will be up on a Kolami YouTube channel. Where KOL-AMI.org is our website. And you can find out more there about Elise and all of the things we do, our upcoming programming. We have a lot of things happening at Kolami, including an upcoming Hebrew class. If you've always wanted to learn to read Hebrew with Rabbi Chaikin, he's got a 4-week class coming up. We have some incredible other scholars, our Sunday Scholar series, a wonderful scholar, one of the very first Orthodox women rabbis, Sunday, November 15th at 4 p.m. She's an expert in Jewish biomedical ethics and halachic organ donation. So join us for that. So much more this Friday night. We'll be streaming live at 6:30 p.m. on Facebook, YouTube, and our temple website, KOL-AMI.org/livestream, or on the landing page. And we have a guest speaker, Gamal Palmer, who's a senior vice president of the LA Jewish Federation, and he specializes in diversity, equity, inclusion, and we'll be continuing our anti-racism work, and he'll be speaking about how we can be more inclusive of Jews of color as a Jew of color himself. So a lot more. Elise, again, thank you. Thank you to everybody for being with us. Intuitive Eating, St. Martin's publication, 4th edition, over 500,000 copies sold, helping us, Elise Resch, to reframe our brains and be more in touch with our bodies and connect them to our spirits and our souls. Thanks, Elise, so much for tonight.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity. I actually have a good time. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah, so glad.
Thank you.
So glad.
Take care, everyone.